Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome again to our webinar today on the Introduction to Interventions for Mental Health and Addiction with our special guest speaker, Rocky Montesano. For those of you who are longstanding attendees of our webinars, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to EHN Canada, we are a leading nationwide network of treatment facilities for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We offer inpatient services in beautiful treatment centers coast to coast, as well as the virtual intensive treatment options that really make care accessible and flexible across the country. And now to stay updated on our future webinars and newsletters, we invite you to opt into our mailing list by filling out the form that is linked in our Q&A chat. At the same time, you can also visit our website at any time to find out more about us, and that's ehncanada.com. For today's webinar, everybody's camera and microphone are turned off, but please feel free to use the Q&A box at any time to submit your questions for us. We will also be sending out a follow-up email in the next 10 to 14 days after the webinar, and that will contain a link to the recording for today's session as well as your attendance certificate. Myself and Rocky are both based in the Toronto area, which is located on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or grew up on, please visit native-land.ca. Now, allow me to properly introduce our honored guest today, which is Rocky Montesano. Now, Rocky is a highly respected and licensed psychotherapist and certified intervention professional. Rocky's professional journey includes a contemplative psychotherapy diploma from the Institute of Traditional Medicine in Toronto in collaboration with the prestigious Nalanda Institute for Contemplative Science in New York. He's also a graduate of the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals and holds certifications as a certified sex addiction therapist as well as a certified multiple addictions therapist. Rocky is also a trained interventionist with Can-Am Interventions, and he is a member of the Association of Intervention Specialists and certified CIP through the Pennsylvania Certification Board. With over 25 years of experience working in the addictions field, Rocky has a wealth of knowledge helping people with addictions and trauma, from working with troubled youth to teaching behavioral change to educating others on relapse prevention methods. His current professional focus involves trauma and recovery using a contemplative approach. Rocky has dedicated his career to helping individuals, couples, and families who are impacted by trauma, addiction, and problematic sexual behavior. So without further ado, I'd love to kick off today's session with you, Rocky. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe you could start us off with just telling us a little bit about you and why you chose to get into psychotherapy and intervention.
Well, first, I begin by saying good morning, good afternoon, and maybe even good evening for some of the people that are on this. Thank you, EHN and Bellwoods, for the opportunity to give a little bit of information on such an important topic, interventions, especially with mental health and substance use disorder. So a little bit about me. So you gave my resume out, but I think on a personal note, what drove me into this work is my own lived experience. So in Ontario, back in the late 80s, early 90s, there weren't that many treatment centers, and because I was suffering from mental health and addictions, I ended up going to a treatment center actually in the US because there weren't that many here in Canada. And when I returned, I found myself in the recovery field. As a matter of fact, my initial foray into it was with back then CAMH was called ARF, Addiction Research Foundation, and I started doing some work with them first on a volunteer basis and then doing behavioral change and relapse prevention. And I started to realize that there was a big problem and not much solutions out there. There weren't many solutions. And so I just got more and more involved in the addictions field. I started to, back in the late 90s, I started running a retreat center. My wife and I built a retreat center, and I started working with people in the recovery field. So people who were either suffering from addiction or who were in recovery and trying to find or get a deeper understanding of their behaviors. And so I ran that treatment center for a retreat center, because it wasn't a treatment center, it was a retreat center. It was a
Mhm.
weekend thing where we would do a lot of different exploratory uh, um, um, modalities, and we focused on recovery. And it's interesting because the CSAT that you explained, which is the Certified Sex Addiction Therapy, that evolved from those retreats, because as I started to do more men's retreats, I started to understand that there was an undercurrent for a lot of people with attachment issues and sex addiction.
Mhm.
So that evolved out of my retreat center. I got involved in interventions uh, mid to late 20s, 2020, 2015, 2016, when I met Patty Pike, who runs the Can-Am interventions. And she was putting together at one of your sites in Nova Scotia an intervention training. And I decided to go out there because I had been doing what you would call 12-step interventions, and
Right.
nothing structured. And it was quite interesting when I did this training, the structure behind it, and there was a method, and um, there was a community that were involved in doing interventions that have been involved in this for a number of years. And so I had a community now to draw from to learn a little bit more effectively how to do a proper intervention and to give the best results to the people that I was doing the interventions for. So, and
Mhm.
since then, I've gotten more and more involved in doing interventions. And half of my work now is interventions, and the other half is my psychotherapy work.
Okay. Yeah, no, no, thank you so much for kind of that really great intro. It's always fascinating kind of hearing people's story and how you get to where you are. Have you say a lot of that comes from you wanting to help and also your personal experience in recovery as well. And have you found that your background has really played a lot into kind of how you approach your work?
I think that's the biggest gift. You look back and I look at, what I went through, and, I kind of I like to call it the snake medicine, right? How do you treat a
Mhm.
snake bite? Well, with snake venom, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, in this field of work, because I have that lived experience, I can understand and better relate to in people with the substance use disorder or mental health. I can better relate with them because of my own experience, and they can relate with me because I get them.
Mhm.
That helps tremendously when I'm working with families and with individuals, because I can also better explain to the family what's going on.
Mhm. For sure.
So the lived
Yeah.
experience is big. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of when you start working with families and their loved ones, what is usually sort of the motivation or the impetus for someone to seek out your help and your assistance?
So usually I get what's called a first caller, right? And it's usually a loved one. It could be a friend. A lot of times it's a parent or it's a brother, sister, um, a loved one. And usually their concern is that they have someone in their life that they know is struggling with mental health or addiction. Usually the two go together. And they're trying to find some way, some solution to get them help. So what they do is they reach out, they look for someone. Everybody's seen interventions on TV, the program, right?
Right.
So that's an inspiration for some people. Maybe it's possible for them to have the same thing happen. So everybody does a bit of research, and my name will pop up, or I get referred by someone that I've done an intervention for, or I will get referred by some of the people that I've worked with, some of the treatment centers, like yourselves. You know, you
Mhm.
you've been very helpful with a lot of families. The Edgewood Health Network has been helpful with a lot of families, and I've been referred to quite often by, the Bellwoods in particular, for working with people that are looking for an intervention. So it comes
Mm-hmm.
from many different areas, right? But usually it's the
Sure.
first caller that will be the one that calls, and they are troubled. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to go about it. And so that's when the relationship starts to develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you also mentioned obviously the TV show Interventions Canada. Do your interventions actually look like that? Are they really that dramatic and timely when you
I would
when you dive into your work?
I would lie if I said no. Sometimes they could be very dramatic, but
Right.
not as often, right? It's I think the drama is more in the anticipation for the family than it is in the actual intervention. Family members, relatives, friends, are a lot more concerned about how the individual is going to respond when we're doing the intervention, and of course, because of their interactions, are very fearful about what's going to happen during that intervention. And so the drama is more internal than it is external, right? I have had a few situations where it can get a little bit, but the interventionist responsibility is to be able to help regulate the room, right?
Right.
I use my nervous system to try and help them with their nervous systems, right? So I bring that in with me. And so my work, I have to make sure that I'm doing my work when I'm going in there, because that helps the family and it helps the individual that's being, I guess the best way to put it is being confronted.
Well, that's the thing. I guess both the loved one and the intended person for the intervention have probably been experiencing a lot of emotions up to that point,
That's
and a
right.
lot of things going on in their relationship. How do you try and regulate that? How do you help both the loved one and that intended person kind of through to that next step in what they need to do?
So how I've been trained, and what I've learned over the years now is, the first thing is I want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get that first, let's just walk through it. Okay. So I get that first call, and
Mm-hmm.
I talk to the individual that's doing the call, and I start to question him about, what's going on, what's happening for their loved one. And then I asked them, if we're going to move forward here, what's this going who was going to be involved? And I get a sense of the people that we're going to bring in. And I tell them, it sounds crazy, but I call it a love-in. So anybody that's coming in here, I want to make sure that they're coming from a place of love, because the person that we're going to be doing the intervention with, um, is isolated, feels
Mm-hmm.
alone, is caught in this web of addiction or mental health and cannot see outside that. And what we want to do is come in there and not confront them or trigger them, but bring a message of love and hope for them. And that we're so I try to get the family to build a community. I call it team. So if it's Anne or Frank that we're working with, I call it Team Anne or Team Frank, and that we're coming here to help motivate them to a different place in their life, maybe getting some help. So
Mm-hmm.
we put a team together, and the team that we put together is very important. That's the first step. The
Mm-hmm.
second step I like to do is I like to send out a questionnaire to all the team members, what I call team members. And the questionnaire is really to get a different perspective from everybody on what they're witnessing and what they're experiencing with that individual. Because we don't all see and feel and experience things the same way. And it gives me a broader perspective of what's going on. That's number one. Number two is that if there's any secrets or anything in the closet, this is a perfect place for me to tease that out, so that when we do the intervention, there's not as many surprises, because there's
Right.
always going to be a little surprise, but there's not as many. So I try and get them to answer this questionnaire just to tease out a little bit more information. Then
Mm-hmm.
what I do is family meetings with them. So I get the family together, And depending on the type, there's different models for interventions, right? There's like what they call the Johnson's model, which is probably one of the oldest, which is, it's a direct confrontation, but it's done in a loving way. And basically, it's a surprise intervention, right? And then there's the family systemic model, or what they call the Arise model, or the Sortie, the Ed Sortie model, which is like motivational interventions. And these models all come around the fact of you work with the family because the family's been impacted, and the family is also involved in the addiction. So
Mm-hmm.
to some degree, there is a relationship that happens between the individual and the family, that they've developed a pattern amongst themselves, and that pattern isn't always the greatest pattern. So I work with the family and try and tease out what's going on there, what's their role in here, right? How has the family been impacted, and how are they also involved in helping keep the individual where they are. So
Mm-hmm.
these family meetings really, it's family work. It's family, systems work here, where we start looking at our own responsibilities here, how we're, relating to the individual, and how we're also responsible for our own roles in here. And so we tease that kind of out. So if we do get the individual help, what we're also doing is getting help for ourselves. So when they return, right, there's going to be change within ourselves too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the person with the mental health or substance use disorder that we want to address, it's ourselves too.
Yes. Yes, no, for sure. And the family program is a big part of all of our treatment offerings as well. We completely, understand how big of a role family and loved ones play in recovery and supporting it, and making sure that that's successful. Are there often times where you come in and you do all this groundwork with the family and the loved ones, when you get into the intervention and speaking with the intended person, that there is a big disconnect between what loved ones are seeing and what that individual is experiencing?
A lot of times, yes, because they're in their own little world. So there's, and I mean this in the kindest way, there's denial, there's justification, there's rationalization, there's many different ways that we, if we've been if it's, substance use disorder or mental health, we're in our own little world and we can't see outside that world. It's very difficult. This is
Mm-hmm.
how we've been existing, this is how we've been coping, this is how we've been managing ourselves, and we've developed these coping skills. And so, um, we can't see what you're seeing, or the individual can't see what the family's seeing. And so sometimes that's why the group is so important, because when it's a whole group coming in and they're doing it in a loving way. So one of the things I want to make clear is that when the family comes in, they're prepared. I have them do letters. It's not ad lib, because what happens is with the ad lib, if they're saying something and they get interrupted, they can lose their place. Or if the individual reacts to what they say, triggers them, then you get emotional responses that start to happen. By having them prepared, writing letters, removing any words that are triggering in the letters, any accusations, what we're basically trying to communicate with the individual is that here we have a loving son, a loving brother, a loving friend, a loving cousin, that we remember all these great times with, and now we know you're struggling and we want to help you. We want to get you back the way we remember you. And
Mm-hmm.
so we don't want to use any accusatory words, we don't want to point out behaviors. What we want to do is just bring them back to who they once were, and try and get them to realize that we're missing that person. We miss that relationship. I want my daughter, I want my cousin, I want my aunt, I want my uncle. Whatever it is, we want to communicate that to the individual. So, yeah, they may not be able to see it immediately, but when you get enough family members, and sometimes they turn into very emotional sessions. It's a real healing session when you're in a good intervention. If it's properly organized and orchestrated, it's a real big healing session for everybody involved, including the individual. That's who gets the most of this. They're feeling the heart energy in the room, and that's steps them out of um, their protective bubble that they've created for themselves. This
Right.
confrontational attitude, right?
Hmm. And do you find that that usually works on the first session, or do you kind of need to build up to that point? How do you find like there are barriers?
There can be. So nothing is 100%, especially when you're dealing with this, right? It's
Mhm.
so what happens a lot of times, not a lot of times, but what'll happen if you're properly prepared, the level goes up on the percentage of success.
Mhm.
The stronger the cohesion of the family, the more you're going to get out of this intervention and out of the individual, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you'll sometimes will get resistance. You're still going to meet that, right? Because
Mhm.
it's not always 100%. And so the family, the members that are in this have to also be prepared to say, okay, we can continue this conversation. So depending on the model of intervention you use, we can continue this conversation and work together to try and get better,
Mhm.
right? So that's an approach. Another approach is you can have the family prepared with second letters, and the
Okay.
second letters becomes boundaries. And the boundaries are simple because a lot of parents don't want to throw their children out, but you know what, I no longer will support you financially. I no longer will. If dinner's at 6, I'm not going to hold food for you in the fridge. Dinner's at 6, you come and eat. You start wanting to, and this is stuff you work with the family, you start to bring back the individual members of the family back to a normalcy. What was it like before this went down the road that it went down? What
Mhm.
would you like the family to look like? And then try and get the family to behave that way until the individual realizes that they either join them or they continue to be further isolated. And a lot of times, what they'll do is join. 85% of the time, uh, if the intervention didn't work out as you wanted to, even after that second letter, what will happen is if the family holds up their boundaries and maintains their own self worth and their own self esteem and their own way of holding their space and not be triggered by the individual, what ends up happening is that if everybody does that, then the individual sees that, okay, I either change or I'm going to be further isolated from this family, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times, the percentage here goes up, where within the next week or two the individual will change their mind and say, okay, I'm willing to do something, because everybody's now is resisting it, right?
Right.
And this depends on the models that you're using, right? Because there are some where the individual is not working at home and it can be a little bit more difficult, but the family still needs to work on themselves. If the intervention did not, you didn't get the result you wanted, what ends up happening is everybody else needs to get on with their life. They need to start taking and doing self-care, because
Mhm.
what happens with most families is they're consumed with trying to get their loved one to be and do and behave a certain way, and it's not working. So
Right.
it's return back to self and take care of self, right?
Right. No, for sure. That must be challenging, and I think setting boundaries and kind of giving and trying to help others is sort of what we all naturally want to do when it comes to a loved one. And so having somebody, I think, guide you to a slightly different path must be very eye-opening, but also challenging.
It is. So there's a second piece to this, because even when the individual does choose treatment, I like to stay in contact with the family to prepare them for when they come back,
Mhm.
because there's going to be some changes that are going to happen on both ends.
Right.
And so you have the loved one that's gotten their treatment, they're in there learning about addiction and getting the psychoeducation, getting the therapeutic education, you know, doing a deeper dive into, what has been happening and where their issues are in life. But the family hasn't gotten that. And so
Hmm.
I like to also, work with the family and try and get them to look at themselves and possibly get a little help themselves so that when the two meet again, you don't go back to old patterns,
Hmm.
right?
Right. And how well do you think actually families do that? Once that individual comes out of treatment, do you actually see drastic changes in communication and kind of handling that relationship?
Depending on what the family is allowing me to do with them. So
Mhm.
some families just want that intervention, get it going, and believe that where they're at is where they are, and that they're good with it. And so I don't challenge them on that. I invite them to get some family help, some family therapy. I mean, all 12 steps have places where you can go, like Al Anon,
Mhm.
Alateen. Bellwoods has family programs. Most treatment centers have family programs, and I try and get the family involved in those, right?
Mhm.
Because it's it's beneficial not only between the relationship between themselves and their loved one that they've sent away, but it's also beneficial for themselves, for them to work on themselves and to, deal with some of the stuff that has occurred over that relationship
Mhm. For sure.
because they can be
And
quite
then
toxic.
right, exactly. Like that, there's just so many different elements that go into supporting someone in recovery and giving them the tools and the path to success. And certainly, family and loved ones is one of them. Kind of what other ways do you typically support an individual or loved ones when it comes to recovery and treatment and intervention?
So
And kind of
I
how long?
always, yeah, my biggest thing for everybody is this continuity of care.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that goes for everybody. So, you have the individual that we've worked on to get them into treatment. Um, and when they come out, because, treatment centers are great because uh, they help, and it could be outpatient or inpatient, they help the individual work on a lot of different issues for that, 6 to 8 week, I call it the bubble, the 6 to 8 week bubble.
Hmm.
But when you come out of that, and that's why, most places offer the aftercare, right?
Yeah.
And I usually tell people the aftercare is great, and why not add a bit more? Get
Hmm.
yourself a therapist, get somebody that you can continue to do work with so that you can address some of those underlying things that have never been addressed. Because
Yeah.
you can only do so much in a short period of time. It's good to do like longer period of work on yourself, right? And usually I invite the family to do the same thing. It's like, we've dealt with this. Now it's time you do some self-care and getting some, there are groups you can join. There are therapists you can get. There is treatment centers that the family can go to also to do some some family work,
Hmm.
and I try and encourage everyone to do this, right? Because um, addiction can be and mental health can be quite brutal on everybody psychologically, right? It can really affect a lot of people and leave a lot of trauma that does not get dealt with.
Yeah, very much so. And you also mentioned kind of the longer term work that needs to be done. And you're right, we offer aftercare, but that's only one small piece.
Yeah.
A huge part of the recovery work is after somebody leaves our treatment center and goes back in your care, goes back to their family, to their home, and then they have to actually apply those skills and every day, work on their recovery.
I like to look at the brain like a muscle, and that's where we hold a lot of our memory. And so, if we started this program, it's like going to the gym. You continue going to the gym and you continue working on that muscle, right? And so, if there's a lot of stuff in there, that's why I like to suggest continue getting some help, work on that. And
Mhm.
what's the worst that can happen? You get better.
Right? Hopefully that's a positive thing.
That's right.
So
That's
something to
right.
look forward to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then so, we have a lot of individuals who are joining us today on our webinar who maybe don't know a lot about intervention. And so kind of what would be your advice for somebody who's looking to take that first step, who has somebody in their life who is struggling, maybe refusing help? Kind of what would your best advice be for them?
So, I mean, there's many ways to approach this. So, there's what's called a simple version, right? And that is, and I'm sure, most people have tried this, maybe some haven't, but have a one-to-one with the individual. Sit down and have a one-to-one with that individual, right? And see where that goes, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes some of us just need a listening ear, right? And so that's a simple way to begin the process. If that doesn't work, well then, maybe the next approach might be is to contact a professional,
Mhm.
right? You can do your interventions on your own. So somebody could go through the process of doing an intervention, like getting the family together and doing a family intervention. uh,
Mhm.
and those work. I'm not it's not black and white. Those can work. It's not this is the only way to do it. They can work. The difference that I would say that happens for most people is that when you have an outside person, a professional, come in the session, it changes the dynamic in the room a bit because the family has already developed a dynamic. And so having a third person or a third party come in that is a professional changes the energy in the room and the response to the individual that we're confronting,
Mhm.
right? So having a professional come in does help considerably,
Right.
right? And so I would uh, research and look for people like myself that do this kind of work and really um, um, not just pick anybody, but find out, what are their credentials? How long have they been doing it for?
Mhm.
What's their success rate? Do they belong to? Do are they certified? Have they been, gone through and worked with a body of people that acknowledge and have um, um, a community that they can work with and are responsible to, so that it's not just somebody coming in there, has a couple of days or a couple of months or a couple of years in recovery and decides that this is what they're going to do with no experience, with no background. Because
Mhm.
when you're doing interventions, you never know what you're going to walk into, and it is good to have some good training, and it's good to have done some good work on yourself, so that when you're in these situations, um, first of all, you know how to work in that situation, and number two is not get triggered when you're in that situation.
Right, you're in the middle of a very intense situation oftentimes with a lot of backstory, a lot of emotions.
And if you haven't done your own work, your own personal work, when you're in that environment, that comes up. It's
Mhm.
like it's like any good therapist, right? You're in a session with someone, and something happens in that session that brings up some of your own stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like, I have a supervisor I work with that I bring that back to work on that stuff, so that I can be fully present for what the work I am doing. And it's the same thing in the interventions.
Mhm.
Like I encounter things in there that are very similar to what I went through. And
Right.
sometimes they bring things up, right? So the more work I do on myself, the more present I can be in that room.
Hmm.
with that individual when it comes up.
Right. Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned, working on yourself, seeking out training, proper certifications. It's often hard for individuals to navigate the mental health and addiction system. There are a lot of resources out there, but it's probably challenging for individuals to know what is reputable and what is not. Are there kind of certain ways that you would say, yeah, it's for for individuals to know that interventionist is reputable?
So there, when I first started, we didn't have it in Canada, so that's why I
Mhm,
went through the Pennsylvania. I did AIS, which is the Association for Interventionists. I,
mhm,
I went through them. I did my training with Patty, who also does, Patricia Pike. She's got a training coming up. I think it's August 9th, 10th, and 11th for interventions.
mhm,
Um, but I went and did my training with her, and it went through the Pennsylvania board, and so I got certified there. And then a few years later, CACCF
mhm,
uh, started doing the same thing here in Canada. So you can now go on their site and look for interventionists, right? And you'll see that through their interventionist site, they have to be certified to get on their site.
mhm.
So that's a place you can go in Canada, right? CACCF.
Fair enough. Yes. Yeah, and Rocky, you mentioned the training with Patty. So yes, I believe she's got virtual trainings coming up. So there is one the first week of August or second week of August rather. There's also another one that's Canadian specific, more of an introduction to brief interventions that we are supporting as well on July 24th and 25th. And so
Yes,
we'll put Patty's email in the chat as well for anybody who is interested in joining that workshop session. And Rocky, you are also co-hosting that session, I believe.
correct, correct. And what that's about,
Mm-hmm.
what that is about, because that adds a second piece to what we're talking about, because you have the intervention training, but what's nice is to have the case management
Mm-hmm.
and the case management, which is what this does. It introduces both pieces because when you're doing interventions, you want to have that case management piece,
Right.
right? You want to be able to help the individual not only with getting treatment, but the aftercares, the therapists afterwards, if there's any other needs that they need, and then also working with the family and managing the family and trying to get their needs met. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
little package that comes with it, right? And the two go beautifully together, and that's why Patty and I decided to put that up as a training here, an intro to, and I
Right.
believe that's July, correct?
Yes, yes, July 24th and 25th. Yes.
Yeah.
And Rocky, in the time that I've known you and the couple of the other interventionists that we also work with, I really see you as a very much a wraparound service. You really put your arms around the family, around the individual, and you support them in so many different ways from beginning to end. And I think sometimes your engagement is quite long. It's months,
It
if
can
not
be.
longer. Mm-hmm.
And you said something wonderful there, Suan, and that is, wrapping myself around them. I believe that's what we need. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the individual needs to be wrapped around, which is what I was referring to. It's like kind of like a loving for them. It's like, we love you, we know who you are, we know what you're capable of, we're here for you. There's that piece, but then there's the piece for the family too. They need to be wrapped around also because they've been traumatized by, when we're in uh, uh, when we're in substance use disorder and when we're in mental health, uh, um, you know, a lot of things happen, a lot of traumatic things happen, and the family is impacted by that. And
Mhm.
so, the family needs that, like you said, that wraparound, that being held. It's like, yeah, we all need it, right? And so,
Do a little
yeah,
bit of love, right? It's hard to ask for help, but it's nice when somebody thinks about it, thinks about you and extends that hand.
right. I'm working with a family right now, and it's, I think the biggest thing that I can say is that they're being held right now. We don't know. We're still working on the intervention, but the important piece is that they're being held, they're being heard, right? And they're being heard from somebody outside who understands and doesn't judge gets it, right? And that's been the biggest impact for them. And it's so heartwarming when people connect that way, right? Because it's like, okay, the healing's already starting,
Hmm. For
right?
sure. And then, and Rocky, I'm just keeping an eye on time. I was wondering, just before we jump into the questions, if you could maybe just relay a particular story that's made a big impact on you in terms of your intervention work, whether it was something that was very challenging or a really great success story that you've seen.
There's been a lot of success stories.
Hmm.
Um, I guess here was an interesting one because I saw this one family, and when I did the intervention, I found out that there was much more going on than addiction, and that was the transformation that the one child was trying to go through sexually,
Mm,
and the
right.
family didn't know about it. And it was interesting because at one point we were sitting, um, we had the individual kind of separated from the family, and all of us were sitting together because the individual didn't want to sit with us. And if that's their, if that's their position, I'm gonna, I want to honor that, right? And so
Hmm.
at one point, just I don't know what it was, but during the intervention, I had this intuition to just ask for permission to go and sit with them. And
Hmm.
so I asked, and of course, uh, I was invited to go sit with them. And
Right.
as I sat there, I looked, and it was sincere, and I guess they got it. And I said, "What else is going on for you?" And that's when that whole other side came up that the family didn't know about. And
Mm,
and it was, I think it was the first time that the individual got to come out and say what was really happening for them. The family got to hear it and felt safe enough that it could be said. And
mhm.
so when we did look at treatment centers, we found a treatment center that was able to address that
I see.
as well as the addiction,
Right.
right? And it's a real it's one that touches me quite a bit because you just never know what you're going to encounter and what the possibilities are until you're actually there, and that one stands large in my mind and in my heart, right?
Mhm.
It's like I was glad that I was there that day, and I took that risk of saying, "Can I come and sit with you?" Right?
Yes. Yeah, no, very much so. And no, thank you so much, Rocky. And I feel like that ties together so many of the things that we spoke about today. How important it is to approach the situation with love. That there are always some disconnects between a loved one, no matter how much they're reaching out, and kind of what that intended person is really experiencing and feeling and going through. That may not come out until a professional comes steps in and provides some support, like you've done so many times. So thank you so much, Rocky. Okay, and I do see some questions flowing in, so we can go ahead and tackle a couple of them. One of the first ones would be, Rocky, what do you think about the difference between recovery and wellness in relation to substance use disorders?
What do I think the difference between recovery and wellness?
Hmm.
I don't think there is a difference between recovery and wellness. I think the two go hand in hand. If you are in recovery, part of the recovery process is wellness. Um,
Hmm.
whatever that wellness looks like for you, it's about bringing body, mind, and spirit together, and all three all three work together, and so you can't have recovery without wellness. um,
Hmm.
I don't know if that's what the question was referring to.
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. And you talked a lot about self-care, both for the family as well as the individual who's going through treatment. And so much of that I think is probably lost
Yeah,
prior to engaging in treatment or engaging with someone like yourself.
yeah, I can't see the two without each other. I like when I think recovery, I think wellness. When I think wellness, I think recovery. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever that wellness looks like, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that recovery looks like, right? Whether if it's just me working on my weight issues, right? It's so what am I doing to take care of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very much so. Okay, and then are there any specifics that are necessary for a family who will be receiving somebody coming back from a treatment center to support them in the best way possible?
I like to do this. I like to when I work with families, what I like to ask is, or what I suggest to the family is to have the discharge plan shared with the family if the client is open to that,
Hmm.
because then that lets the family know is what's their plan when they come home.
Right.
What is it going to look like when they come home? What are they going to do to uh, to have that continuity of care? What are they going to do to continue what they started in treatment at home? And if the family is aware of it, then they know, at least they know some of the things that need to be done. And then also, what has the family looked at for themselves?
Hmm.
What are they doing when that individual comes home? How are
Hmm.
they preparing themselves? Have they done any work on themselves?
Hmm. Yeah, and very much so because we talked about that as well, Rocky. The how important it is for the family to engage in therapy if that's what right for them, or specialized groups that treatment centers might offer, and then kind of for an interventionist and psychotherapist like yourself, do you also do regular check-ins with the family, kind of ongoing, and making sure that they get the support that they need, or they might be able to talk through some challenging situations they've had, even sort of post-treatment?
So it all depends on the type of engagement I have with the family. So for some families, I have like what I do with my intervention package with them is I'll give them 30 days or 45 days, depending on what the family wants. But usually I'll give them a 30-day because what'll end up happening if I do that with everybody, I won't have much time left for myself.
Right. Yeah.
So I'll give like a 30-day where the family has access to me for 30 days. And what I like to do also is communicate with the family, uh, uh, and let them know how their loved one is doing. And I usually try and get the loved one to give me an ROI, so a release of information, so that I can, relay to the family how well they're doing in treatment, and what's going on for them, so that the family has some understanding, right? So, but I'll usually do like a 30-day in my contracts with the families. That's what I like to do is a 30-day with them, right? So you have me for 30 days. If there's questions that you need answered, if you want to talk about, their return and what can you do to prepare for it, we talk about that, because remember, every family is different and the people involved are all different. It could be just a wife, it could be just a husband, it could be, a whole family with their child that's away. It could be a cousin, it could be a relative. So I have to kind of, but I give them that 30 days of open communication.
Right. No, fair enough. They've got kind of that to fall back on whenever situations arise, and they could probably be at unusual hours of the day or the week. I'm sure, as it always happens. Um, okay, another question we do have here is a bit more around your advice. So, do you have advice for support that friends or family can offer when intervention attempts fail? And how can they continue to have a relationship with that person, as well as manage expectations around the substance use?
So here we come back to, all you can do at that point is take care of yourself,
Mhm.
right? So how do I look after my own needs now? How can I do work on myself so that I am not impacted directly from what they're doing, right? Where, you know, the best word I can use is boundaries here. How can I create my own, not only external boundaries, but internal boundaries here,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
I have to take care of myself now because you're not willing to take care of yourself.
Yes, yeah, and that I feel like that's probably one of the most challenging things for a
It's
loved one.
a difficult one.
Mm, that's probably a little bit at a time, right? A day at a time,
Yep, that
and practice.
ask for help. Ask for help, right? That's the key. Ask for help. If you can't do it on your own, you ask for help. There's help out there.
Very much so. Um, okay, and I think we have time for probably one more question. And there is a question about the connection between mental health and addiction, and because they're so intertwined, how do you approach connecting or uncovering mental health when it's so interconnected and related with substance use?
That's a great question, and it's a difficult one. So, um, reason why I do a questionnaire with the family is that will give me some insight, right? 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to say 100%, 9 times out of 10, when there is substance use disorder, there is an undercurrent of mental health.
Hmm.
Whether, just the fact that we have substance use disorder automatically, says that we have some mental health issues here. We're struggling. But what I like to tease out is there anything in particular or something that's showing up that might be, a big uh, precursor to, mental health, or a marker for it, right? Because when I'm working and I want to get them to a treatment center, because I usually refer to the treatment centers, I want to make sure that the treatment center that they're going to go to is going to address this, and I can give them specifics at that treatment center of some of the stuff that I've learned. The more information I give to the treatment center, the better care they're going to get, and that's via the family. So, but to further get into this, you can't know how bad the addiction is or the mental health is until you treat the addiction,
Hmm.
right? When I pet peeve of mine, sorry, I'm going to throw this out there. You can't do a psychological test, a psychiatric test with somebody if they're fresh off of drugs and alcohol.
Hmm.
Their system is still going through pause, post-acute withdrawal. They're still dysregulated, right? And so you can't do a proper assessment then. So, and this tells you something because they're still dealing with the effects of whatever their substance use is.
Hmm.
So, for the mental health piece, it's only when you extrapolate the addiction piece that now we can see what's really going on and start to look at the mental health piece.
Hmm.
It's hard sometimes to see what it is. Yeah, I work with a lot of people who have had psychosis, right, because of substance use. And so you don't know how badly that's affected them until we stop the drug use and see what happened and what is going on for them. Is that a direct result of the drugs, or is there something else going on? Is there another undercurrent? But
Hmm.
that separation, and you need that time between that separation to really start to tease out, the mental health piece. And sometimes the mental health piece is what's driving the addiction, because I call addiction medication. We use our substance to self-medicate no matter what the substance is, and so the mental health is the driving force behind the addiction.
Hmm. Yes, no, no, very much so, Rocky, and I think that's a basic tenet of a lot of all our programs. Really, is that we tackle both. Yes, there certainly needs to be a time where you need to separate and you need to be able to stabilize that individual, especially if they're struggling with substance use. But so much of what we do in our treatment centers is tackle the mental health that is either fueling and or very much connected with the substance use.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I always say, when people first come to me, that's the first thing I'll say is, what, they're medicating, and so we
Mhm.
find out what they're medicating for.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to diagnose, but we know we do know that they're medicating, right? That's what they're using this for. It's one way to calm their nervous system, calm their minds, whatever's going on for them. And so we want to discover what's behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And so thank you so much, Rocky. I see we're running up against time, but definitely seen some comments that are very positive today. And I think really thanking you, Rocky, to share some of your expertise and knowledge as someone who is actually personally and actively working in the interventions and psychotherapy space. Oftentimes, what people see is what's on TV, and it's not always representative of what's in reality.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your experience and your expert advice with us today. Everybody on the webinar, just a reminder, Rocky and his colleague Patty Pike are running an Introduction to Brief Interventions in Case Management workshop at the end of July. I'm just putting some info, contact info in the chat right now for Patty. So that's patty.pike@gmail.com if you're looking for some more information for that session. And I'm sure it's going to be very, very informative and useful. And they've got some great guest speakers as well, including our own very own Dr. Weiss from Bellwood, as well as a couple of other great guest speakers. So thank you so much again, everybody, for joining us today. Like I said, the webinar recording, as well as your attendance certificate, will be sent out to you within the next 10 to 14 days. And we really hope that you join us again for another webinar in the very near future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rocky. Have a
So
great
much,
day.
Joanne and Bellowoods. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.